Chris and I are particularly happy to speak about College Hill because we feel it's one of the most underappreciated assets in the city. And Chris Kroner's been working on a number of ideas that he's going to share here with the Mass Design Group. I think you know Mass Design Group is a worldwide innovative firm that their stated mission is to research, build, and advocate for architecture that promotes justice and human dignity. And their work is very much recognized and acclaimed around the world. And I think you'll see why when you see some of the ideas for College Hill. I'm Bill Jeffway. I'm the executive director of the Dutchess County Historical Society, but I also work on a research committee of celebrating the African spirit. And that's how I know Nancy Foster. She is also active in that group. And she and I are working together on a couple of ideas that included this one. So thank you to Nancy for paving the way for that. Celebrating the African Spirit is a Poughkeepsie-based group that looks especially at public spaces and how that public space informs and involves a more inclusive history. I'm very pleased to be part of that group. We've also got some advice and counsel from the Revive College Hill Park Coalition, which we're very grateful for. I got a lot of research advice from Holly Wahlberg, so I want to thank her for that as well. We're going to actually start off with the stepping perhaps as far back as we can with College Hill. This is the earliest known depiction of Poughkeepsie. We're looking north, you see the Catskills on the left, to the west, and the kind of classic sloping hill of Poughkeepsie to the right, kind of a hint that College Hill is up there to the right somewhere. And that hill would come to achieve iconic status both as something that is viewed from a distance, such as it is here, and also from the views that it affords once you're at the summit. If you haven't been recently, I encourage you to do so. Of all the milestone dates there are to start from in the long storied history of College Hill, I want to start with 1892. And that's because that was the year that College Hill officially became a city park. And I say officially because from the moment the collegiate school opened its doors in 1836, the school made its walks, its grove, and its roads open to the public. So it served a public function really from the beginning of it becoming a school in 1836. But in 1892, it was official and it was 100% dedicated into the service of public service and enjoyment. And I want to read a few sentences from an editorial in that year from the Poughkeepsie Daily Eagle. This was actually at a moment when the fate of College Hill was not certain. It had been several decades in legal limbo. The College Hill had just been purchased by several well-intentioned, civic-minded individuals who did not have, nor were they ever likely to have, enough money to actually buy it. So they bought it with the firm hope that they would find a donor. So this was a real critical time, a turning point for College Hill. They were seeking out a funder. And it was at this time, this state of limbo, if you will, that the Poughkeepsie Daily Eagle put College Hill up with the railroad bridge and Vassar College as among the important icons at the time. And allow me to read you what the editorial said. The editorial said in part, the proposition to make College Hill a public park, which was everyone's hope, but far from certain, has been discussed many times, and 50 years ago, so he was referencing 1842, it was the principal place of resort of our citizens. And when strangers came here, it was as common to take them up to College Hill and show them the magnificent view as it is now to show them Vassar College and the bridge. I thought you'd be pleased to know that your bridge is up there in the high status of the top three. And in less than a week, a donor stepped forward. That donor was very familiar to Poughkeepsie because he had been a longstanding philanthropist relative to Poughkeepsie. The donor was William Wallace Smith, one of the famous brothers of the Smith Brothers cough drop fame. And not only did the Poughkeepsie-based brothers make exceptional cough drops, right? They became very well known for the marketing itself. And it's, of course, a brand many of us know today. One of the traits of William W. Smith, though, that was different from his brother was that he was a very firm temperance man. And he would give the land to the city on the condition that there would never be a sale there'd never be a sale of alcohol on College Hill. And the city agreed, and he made his gift. The city promised not to ever serve or sell alcohol. But I think there have been some ways around that, perhaps, by now. So we're talking about the views of College Hill from afar. Of course, it's most famous for its views from the top. And by 1892, there were a number of ways different people around the country, if not the world, had come to see the beautiful views from College Hill, because it is a 360-degree view to see all around. This was an illustration that was in Ballou's pictorial drawing room companion. And it's actually based on a daguerreotype of a Poughkeepsie-based daguerreist, S.L. Walker. This is a view to the southwest. It's probably the most common view because it overlooks Poughkeepsie. One of the things that really stands out for me as we look at these early engravings and photographs is the degree to which it was farmland right at the base of College Hill. So these roads left and right here surrounding this kind of field are North Clinton and North Hamilton streets. And you can see that it's very much farmland. That becomes even clearer in some other instances. Stereo views were an important way that people got to see what the view from College Hill looked like. This is a stereo view from one of the Bierstadt brothers, one of whom went on to become a famous painter. These are images from another stereo view, and they show you the corn stalks that are bundled up between North Hamilton and North Clinton Street. This is another engraving that was done from the daguerreotype of Samuel Walker, and it's that famous southwest view. And again, if you look closely, you see the extraordinary corn growing in those fields there. And it's worth pointing this out, I think, because one of the most amazing things about College Hill is how well preserved it is, right? So you consider the development that happened and pushed aside this rural feeling here, and yet we're lucky enough to have College Hill undeveloped largely. This is a view to the east. It overlooks Morgan Lake, which is a man-made lake that Mr. Morgan made when he was hoping to have a hotel here. It worked out. This is a photograph I took recently to the north. And, you know, you do get glimpses of water tanks, but I personally find them very discreet, and the view so commanding that the real story is that this is a real jewel in the crown of the Hudson Valley. So if you take into consideration the fact that this is clearly really unique, but really reflective of the Hudson River Valley, the other dynamic to consider before we look at kind of the development of the hill is how it managed to stay undeveloped. And I say caution because there was this improvement party in the 1830s. Matthew Vassar was involved. And of course, economic improvement is a great idea, but sometimes things can be taken a bit too far. I want to share with you a couple of ideas that they had in the 1830s. And this map is from that time. It's 1836 or 1837. And I pulled out three things to look at: the whaling dock, the railroad, and the planned population of College Hill with villas. Whaling dock, yes, that's right. The idea was to actually have ships that would go out for a year or two or several years, come back supposedly with great amount of valuable oil, but after a few years that didn't quite work. But the whaling dock was part of the investment strategy of the Improvement Party, and it involved other investments like a locomotive manufacturing company, and it also involved a railroad. And imagine how early this is in 1836. I think the first railroad in the United States operated in 1831. So by 1832, the incorporation of the Dutchess County Rail Company comes along, and they have a plan to connect the whaling dock to the area around the Connecticut, Massachusetts, Dutchess County border. And these were the days that trains looked like carriages attached to the train. And they had a kind of a freight function, like with the barrels, and they had a passenger function in that capacity of having a carriage. So here you have a railroad actually laid out and planned and thought of as early as the 1830s. Quite amazing. And the railroad did come along here with a slightly different idea. I'll show you in a minute. This is a contemporary view through Google Maps of College Hill and the Walkway, right? So we have the Walkway, the railroad operational in 1889, but prior to that, in 1871, the Poughkeepsie and Eastern Railroad started operating. It actually had a connection up at the Hudson River Hospital. But the area that was the station on Smith Street is actually very visible today, you understand it. And that the only difference from 1832, the 1832 plan was that it did not go to the whaling dock. It instead went to the Hudson River Hospital. But I have a couple of pictures of that Smith Street station. You can see College Hill in the background. And as I said, they had freight beds and they had passenger cars, and they actually declared certain times for certain trains and whether they were passenger or whether they were freight. Major plans accordingly. These are pictures we have in our collections, and you can see that the train goes out to Salt Point, Clinton Corners, Pine Plains, and so on, and out to Massachusetts Connecticut border. So, alas, there was a train there. It was used to shift farm goods into the river exchange, and used to take things imported from the river to get them to Eastern County. The villas. The idea of the villas, at first I was thinking, well, how, that seems almost incredible that could happen. And then I started to think, my hometown, I grew up in Northampton, Massachusetts, and I grew up on a little hill called Round Hill. And we have exactly the plan that was intended here but didn't happen. So we have a little blurb from the Improvement Committee saying that it's their plan and intention to develop these villas. It will be studded with villas on all sides to the base. You see that going all around that. And just for fun, I compared, because I personally know it well, there's Round Hill in Northampton, has a school on it as well, and it's completely dotted with, well, maybe not villas, we call them houses, but our College Hill could have been populated in this way, and it isn't. So I thought that kind of drove home the point for me that we're actually very lucky that I think we're lucky that the 1837 financial panic derailed the plans of the villas. And while it scuttled things like the whaling companies, it did have a little bit of a silver lining here in that the land was preserved. But the big news for College Hill, of course, is 1836, because that's when the school was built. And the 19th century, really, the activity is launched by the school and school building, its corresponding grove, and then the reservoirs, its role in water. But first, looking at the collegiate school, this is what gave College Hill its name. And from the start, the school was meant to be an elite and prestigious institution. The Improvement Party sought out and got a commitment from Mr. Bartlett, and with that commitment that he would teach, they would build him a building, beautiful Greek Revival building, and they did that. There were other buildings, but that Greek Revival building really was the main. And this school was indeed prestigious. It had students from Mexico, from Europe, and it also had local students, one of whom was James Roosevelt, FDR's father, went to school there. So it served as a school for 31 years, 1836 to 1867, but the subsequent 50 years were very uncertain, and it really never had a success again. And then after those 15 years, it was destroyed in a fire in 1917. There was an attempt to operate a hotel that didn't quite work. There was an attempt by Matthew Vassar's nephew to leave money for an orphanage that didn't quite happen. So there were a few trials, errors in terms of building. But you want to get a sense from the very beginning. We actually have an image of the building being constructed, but you have to imagine yourself standing on Mansion Street, looking to the northeast. And this is our Samuel Morse School. If you took yourself back in time to 1835 to the exact same spot, you'd be looking at the home of George P. Oakley. In the background on College Hill, you would see the construction of that building taking place. The other interesting dynamic at the time I will call your attention to is the green space on the west. That ends up being what's called College Grove. And when the city bought the land in 1892, it commented that there were extraordinarily old trees on the west side of the hill that came to be known as College Grove. This is a look at the building once completed from Main Street. The building's in the front of Main Street. This is a good one because we have the London Illustrated News. I told you word got out and around about College Hill. The London Illustrated News in 1844 is talking about the Dutchess County Fair. It was then at Washington Hollow. And there have been some great liberties taken with perspective because this is Washington Hollow, and yet you see College Hill right behind it. What a coincidence. But the kind of exaggeration doesn't stop there. It describes it as a superb white marble structure in the style of the Parthenon. And we wish it had been marble because it would have not been burned completely to the ground as it did. But I guess, what are a few details, right? So they write this inspiring story about the white marble structure. But no need to exaggerate. I think it was a beautiful building in and of itself and on its own. Here's a photograph of it. And in addition to the building itself, I had mentioned that they, from the beginning, created a sense of a park, College Hill as a park. And among that, especially in the late 1800s, were concerts that happened as regularly as weekly in summer. Here you see some people enjoying. There was a new concept of a thing called the picnic, PIC-NIC, and this new concept of a picnic would have been what was going on here. And you can know that it's a popular local destination because we have at the Historical Society quite a few photo albums of local people. And you see a lot of photographs of College Hill. This is the album of Caroline Morgan Clowes, the LaGrange nationally known artist. She just went on what was presumably a Sunday drive with friends. Puts the dog in the carriage, pretending the dog's driving, and they're just out for a nice Sunday drive at College Hill. You find in later photo albums, right? A classic 4th of July, it says Artillery Battery, College Hill, 1926. And they would have been setting off some cannons there as part of the celebration. And I know that there are people here who have gone to the fireworks at College Hill. So there's been a long tradition of College Hill being a kind of public place for celebration. College Grove, I want to speak to a little bit, although Nancy and I are working on another more in-depth presentation on College Grove and the talk that Frederick Douglass gave here in August of 1858. Remember that College Grove is on the west slope. We had a depiction of it in 1852. And this is what it looks like today. And it seems the retaining wall and steps were built in 1892 when the city took over. But that western slope, unfortunately, I don't think it has any of its very, very old trees left, but it at least is, in a sense, it's still a grove. So this beautiful spot managed to attract all types of speakers. I think the acoustics would have been pretty good with the slope of a hill. In August of 1858, on August 2nd, there was a celebration of Emancipation Day. The British ended slavery in 1834, about 30 years before the United States. And until the Emancipation Proclamation in the United States, this British end of slavery was celebrated in the United States. And it just so happened that the big area event that year was featuring Frederick Douglass in Poughkeepsie at College Hill. And I won't get into a lot of detail about it because that for another day. But Philippa Ewing pointed out this photograph to me. It's a daguerreotype. It's earlier than 1858, but I think it really communicates well the tone of what an outdoor grove meeting might have been with Frederick Douglass. And he's there with Gerrit Smith. Frederick Douglass looked a little bit more like that on the right, the Lion of Anacostia in 1858, when he spoke here to 4,000 people for 2 hours. And after 2 hours, he wasn't done. So he went to the Universalist Church and finished up another hour or so. And the New York Times actually published his entire speech in full. And in that speech, he was very critical of Stephen Douglas, who was the US Senator running against Abraham Lincoln. Remember the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Frederick Douglass with two S's here, spoke in Poughkeepsie, really criticizing Douglas, the Senate candidate, and really praising Abraham Lincoln. And Douglas, the Senate candidate in the Lincoln-Douglas debate, took the words of Frederick Douglass and kind of threw them in the face of Abraham Lincoln, accusing him of essentially being Black himself, that he was a brethren of these, of the Black community, and obviously that this was a good reason to not vote for Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln did lose that election, but of course did pretty well in the end. So there's more to the story for another time, but it's a wonderful example of how the Grove was a place to bring people together for things both fun and serious. 1867 sees the closing of the school, and like I said, it's uncertain after that, an uncertain time for the buildings. 1872 becomes the water era, when a pretty sophisticated reservoir is built that's part of a more sophisticated water system for Poughkeepsie. It takes water from the Hudson, pumps it to College Hill, and uses it for fire and drinking water. And this map shows that indeed there are two. The larger one at the top is the 1872 outdoor reservoir, and the smaller one just under it is the underground reservoir Chris will talk to, built in the 20s. So I said the problem with water in the early 1800s like this was contamination from waste and other means, and the other issue was fire. Poughkeepsie had quite a few others bad fires. So one on the left, 1870, one on the right, 1857. The very first reservoir, you know, they still call it Reservoir Square sometimes over at Cannon Street. It was this little reservoir banked up that was meant to be able to help them fight fires. It's now where the monument to the 128th Civil War is. But there was a first attempt to have a reservoir there, so that by the time in 1872, they had a reservoir like this on College Hill. It was very sophisticated, and it involved pumping stations at the Hudson River. So they're moving into a mechanized age, and they're moving into a much more sophisticated water system. And the water system is designed and built to look very beautiful. You can kind of see a horse and carriage off in the distance there. This reservoir is obviously not just functional, but it's meant to be beautiful and park-like. The 1922 reservoir gets a little more serious by being underground. Here you see them creating the frames. They poured concrete, which then became the framing for the vaulted ceilings. These pictures are all from the Poughkeepsie Water Treatment Facility. Randy Allstat there is a wonderful historian and curator up there. of their work. This is how the newspaper announced it and what it looked like just as they were finishing up construction. Like I said, some pretty cool vaulted ceilings in cement. There's all from Randy as well, the construction of it. And another interesting dimension, I think, of the reservoir, it turns out, is that one of the managers of the reservoir and managers of College Hill was Abram Bolin. And when we look at the Frederick Douglass talk, we're also going to look at the role of Abram Bolin as an important Black family. But he tended to the reservoir. He was watchman, caretaker, and he lived on North Clinton Street. And that house was in the family for 100 years. There's Abram Bolin. His wife was Native American and Black, and they had a very large family. Among the children, Gaius Bolin. Now, this house is, you may recognize it, is right at the entrance to College Hill off North Clinton Street. And I can't help but wonder if Gaius Bolin, Abram's son, was living there because at some point it had something to do with the reservoir. I don't know. I need to do a little more work on that. But Gaius Bolin, Abram's son, Gaius Bolin and his wife started a family here, and among their children was a woman named Jane. Jane became the first Black judge, a Black female judge at that, in the United States when Mayor LaGuardia appointed her as such in 1939. So College Hill actually has a very rich Black history in terms of relating to Frederick Douglass or the Bolin family that grew up and worked around the reservoir. 1913 to 17. 1913, William Smith passes away, and there's a thought that they should create a memorial for him, and they struggled with what that memorial should be. This is kind of a design that was actually done, and a prize was given, but the money was not really raised for this to be developed for him. So you kind of get a version of it, right? You can see little echoes of it now up. But it's a greatly scaled back version from that. This was meant to be gates at the entrance of what they call the Smith Street entrance, which there really isn't one now. But as I say, a little bit scaled back, because not only was World War I coming along, 1917 saw the burning of the building. So suddenly College Hill had a lot more problems than just the William Smith Memorial with World War I on top of it. The 1930s, people were talking, many of the things that we're familiar with that we see there now came along in the 1930s, the Dudley Shelter, the Lown Rock Garden, the golf course. This is the Dudley Shelter. Mr. Dudley left money, but it was amplified by money from the Works Progress Administration, and obviously was built to be inspired and reflect the original college building, although on a much smaller space. But I have to say, for a small space, it's very dramatic, and it certainly takes advantage of the 360 degrees you can get from the top. And we're looking at, we're considering and hoping to do a small exhibition within the Dudley Shelter on the history of the Black community around College Hill. The Lown Garden, I understand, is getting some life put into it. Lown was lived in Poughkeepsie on Forbes Street, and he had a garden. People came from all over the world to visit his garden, including a reporter from House and Garden in 1927, and they took a picture of him. They took a photograph, black and white, but still you get a sense of his extraordinary rock garden that he had at his house. And then there have been times since, like the 1965, when there were plans to kind of rejuvenate and restore this. So I'm glad that there's attention back on the rock garden. It's actually a very historic garden. And these kind of spruce ups in the 1930s kind of are the landmarks that take us forward into the 20th century and into the 21st century. And I hope we have some questions at the end, but I'm going to ask Chris to take us through how some ideas to build on that history in a new creative way. So Chris, if you can unmute.
Just unmuted. Hopefully you can hear me.
Excellent.
All right. Bill, just make sure, can you still manage the slides for me? Yep, good. Okay. So I'm Chris Kroner. I'm a principal, Mass Design Group's Hudson Valley Design Lab. We are in Poughkeepsie on Main Street at 289 Main Street now, back as we've started our doors there in our new office. You once might have known us from Academy Street prior to the building collapse, but we've been here this whole time, and it's really exciting, and it's an honor to talk about College Hill, as not only is it the highest point in the city of Poughkeepsie, but we've been dedicated to studying this since we started our office in 2017, and since I joined the revised College Hill Park Coalition at that same time. If you go to the next slide, what we'd like to share with you tonight is a little bit of a tour of some initiatives that we know of that have already come to the coalition and that we've started to map as potentially an exit circuit off of the Dutchess Rail Trail for visitors, and it could also become a beloved loop for residents once again. And I'd love to see how this tour might excite you also in terms of there's lots of places that need thinking, visioning, partnership, and volunteerism. Starting at the next slide, I think we should start with Clinton Street, where we have a couple of creative placemaking efforts that you might want to know about, either that have happened in recent history or that will happen again. This first slide is about pumpkin decoration that happened during COVID, during last Halloween, where we had about 30 volunteers come and decorate the retaining wall along Clinton. And as a way to try to celebrate a COVID-safe, mask-friendly event, Halloween became that perfect synthesis of both efforts, and it became very intergenerational. In fact, the parents, I think, had more fun than the children in this scenario, which was lovely to see. And in the next scenario, right behind that wall, you see something from 2 years ago. College Hill Restoration Day in August of 2018, hosted largely by Yvonne Flowers, Councilwoman Yvonne Flowers, brought us aboard to lead a massive 140-person plus volunteer effort to paint a crowdsourced design for the basketball court. And people came as far away as Troy, New York, to come and participate and to help. Going to the next slide, I think it's really important to know that this park has been largely a part of city's water infrastructure from the onset. And as Bill was talking to you today about the reservoirs, we drew this drawing just to showcase that it's one of these wonderful places where you can experience 3 generations of water infrastructure thinking simultaneously. And so not only is there the Victorian Reservoir, which is the open air reservoir, and then there's the underground cistern up at the top of the hill, which you can see is this kind of darkened space. And then in between is the contemporary water tanks that have been installed most recently. Moving forward again to the next slide. As you ascend the hill, you're offered the Victorian Reservoir again. And I think I've been taking lots of photos from this place because it's becoming quickly probably one of my favorite spots in all of Poughkeepsie. With the assistance of a Greenway grant that the Revived College Hill Park Coalition was able to help bring in for the city, the carriage loop remains largely intact, so you can circumnavigate this entire man-made pond right now. And you can also see that we are still discovering remedies to incorporate these large tanks into the historic park fabric, because they are a little blank and maybe potentially blank canvases for us to consider thinking. But let's go to the next one for a moment also, Bill, because you can continue climbing from here, and you can even see that as you ascend, there's a wonderful extension right now to the Catskills again, because they've actually cleared the entire northern hillside and hillside bank of some of the trees that had been once there And that allowing, as you go up, to see the Catskills in the greater region is really especially important because you can also see the bridges from here. So just looking north ahead of the tanks, with the tanks to your back, is a glorious viewpoint again, and one that I think shouldn't be missed if you come to visit Poughkeepsie. Just beyond that, if you go to the next slide, sits a really curious flat space. It has all of these strange ventilators that are poking kind of into the ground, and these are not off gases. These are providing fresh air to an amazing space below. Bill has given us some historic photographs of that, and I'm going to give you a more contemporary one that has been taken in the last 6 months. This is, oh, the sun has decided to come out. I'm going to try to get in the shadow for a moment. This is a current view of the cistern space, which is still filled with water at this moment, and that's why we haven't gotten inside down to the depths of it. But this is an amazing labyrinth. It's a hall of columns. It's more than 20 feet tall. It's made of concrete, cast concrete, and it's really special because of the groin vaults that span between all of the columns all the way around. And while it's remaining filled right at this moment, is very functional. It's serving as a backup water supply for the 2 large tanks, because Central Hudson is finishing up some dredging work in the Hudson River, and we want to have a redundant water source just in case there ever is a problem. But in short order, this space will be emptied. And I think that's really an amazing opportunity to think about potentially a new purpose. So if you go to the next slide.
That's going to be empty. Did you understand what he said?
Yeah, but I didn't. Then he said.
We got a little chatter. That's terrific. Yes, there's an opportunity once it becomes emptied. And here's an example. Other cities have cisterns. This is one in Houston, Texas. This was an image that I took while visiting it's a park called Buffalo Bayou Park, which has a reservoir also. I took this picture in July of 2018. They have converted their former water reservoir into a series of artistic light and sound installations, usually for long-term installations, usually more than 3 to 6 months. And it's very akin to the basement space of Dia Beacon. And it's interesting and kind of amusing to me because when we called Houston to talk to them about their cistern, they thought they had the only one in the entire country. And cisterns, actually, if you go to Europe, for example, there's lots of underground cisterns. I also traveled to Istanbul, and there's like 100 there, one of which is very well known and is available to the public. So they were really disheartened at first. They were like, "Oh darn, we thought we had the only one." But then they kind of got excited when we pitched the idea that maybe there could be cisterns, and that they could have a relationship to one another, and maybe there could even be an exchange of programming. If you go to the next one, there's an enormous amount of data from the 20s that we've been able to upgrade to begin drawing. Mass has started to translate those drawings into design documents so that we can understand the potential to reactivate this space. There will be certainly questions of entering and exit, because right now you have to come in from the top. And so, but there's an earthwork that goes around the entire cistern. And you want to make sure that you don't kind of puncture through the earthwork too much in order to create enough access points. And so we've been trying to modulate that and coming up with ideas, which you can see in the next slide also, which was an artistic rendering of thinking about ways that we could maybe partner with large-scale artists to take over the space for, much like Houston, for a series of months. Going to the next slide. I think that the rooftop of this is also a question mark. We don't have a program idea yet for what the top could mean. Houston has a performing arts space atop of theirs, but certainly there could be a place for active recreation in terms of a soccer pitch, or there could be a place for food trucks or food market. Lots of ideas that could be thrown around and I think have enormous amount of potential, but should be talked about by the community. Going ahead to the next slide. And this cistern literally sits about 20 or so feet down the hillside from the balustrade of the Dudley Manor. And so this pavilion, of course, has a lot of repair work now that has to be done. And there is a story that some of the balustrades have been taken and replicated and will be reinstalled at some point. And we're trying as a coalition, the Revive College Hill Park Coalition, to facilitate and fast track that effort. Much like we are also trying to work with the Student Conservation Association and Vassar Ecological Cooperative to restore the pollinator garden. Oh, I see a mistake in the spelling. I'm sorry about that. Of the Lone Garden. Here, this is from a few weeks ago, where a series of pollinators and perennials have been just reinstated to try to make an amazing walking path up the east side, very close to where you would park to go to the golf course. And the next slide, please. And just kind of moving down that east side, you'll also see an amazing ball field that I think is very underappreciated. And it's worth taking a walk just to try to see, just beyond this ball field is the entrance point into the golf course. And it would be really, really terrific to try to reactivate this as an amphitheater space for other types of events when it's not being used as a ball field. And then finally, I think as you continue walking right before you get to Morgan Lake, this is a recent initiative to try to create a champions walk, a series of markers to that will be honoring champions of Poughkeepsie who have really, really influenced the successes of the North Side and have yet to be, I would say, sung heroes at this moment. They are largely unsung. And so we've been going, and we just had a community meeting at the Smith Street Housing Authority this week, showcasing a full-scale mock-up of the marker you see on the side to the right, to try to elicit both nominations for champions and design input on the scale of the marker and its shape and its materiality, etc. So with that, I believe that gives you, with the final, I think is a final, maybe a thank you slide, a kind of a quick tour of some things that we've been really, really investing some time and energy into that are literally a stone's throw from the walkway.